hoped that our security system would be up and active today. The part that I was waiting on came in, but I just didn't have time or the energy to get up here and complete the system. Trying to add on to Tiffany's house, and then I found a rock spot I had to address, and had to stop that and go do this. And in the meantime, our sewer system has an aerobic air pump on it, and it quit. I had to stop that, go get this fixed, and overhaul the pump, get that going again. And in the meantime, the brother-in-law come in with a motor job. So, as I went to hop up in the truck, I realized that my left leg don't swing as high as it used to. And so, I realized I don't have no hop left. So I didn't have enough energy nor time to get it done, but I will, I promise you, by the Lord, next Lord's Day, or possibly Wednesday, it will be up and running. Okay, that being said, Matthew 13th chapter, we left off in verse 47. We've had a whole, an enormous amount of information given to us by the Lord as he starts off this chapter with the parable, what's people call the parable of the sower. I like to think of it more in line of the parable of the soil. And the reason I do that is because what he describes as he begins the chapter is the field. He's describing the types of ground where the seed has been sown. Some good seed, it falls in good soil, some falls on stony ground, some falls by the wayside, and he describes to us what happens. And of course, he describes the kingdom of heaven and how it's going to be dispersed. So starts off with the parable of what I call the soil, and we make particular mention. I'm gonna go over I got some brief notes before we get to verse 47, that the man sowing the seed, a good man, and it's good seed, and it's on a good field. And the seed that he's sowing may be small in nature, but it grows to an enormous size, even so much so that the birds of the air come and dwell in it. And then he talks about the leaven of the kingdom, and of course this is the enemy that's going to be the church is going to be approached with, the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. He said, beware of that, and obviously that's the teachings. That's the teaching that come forth from people who hold. It's hard to say for me that people hold different views of the gospel, but they do. They interpret the scriptures completely different. When we read, for example, Mark 16, 15, 16, a very simple passage, he that believes and is baptized shall be saved, he that believeth not shall be condemned. They have a different take on it. I don't know how you can do that unless you just completely ignore what's being said. You know, you just read it and say, well, that's not what it means. It goes on. But people have to take on, and that's leaven. That's bad leaven. It's bad for the church. It's bad for people who are trying to find their way to God. And it's bad for those who would be teachers and ministers. They get indoctrinated by these things, and so they find themselves teaching this error. And then he talks about the treasure found in the field, and he brings to light the fact that it's like a merchant. He finds his treasure and he buys the field, and he gives all for that field. And so we read John 3:16 that God so loved the world he gave his only begotten Son, and we stop there and make mention that the fact is that God has given everything to secure our salvation. He has given everything he can to man. He has nothing else to give. And so we sometimes you take that into consideration and realize that if God has given everything and he has emptied out his treasure upon man, his gift of salvation, and there's nothing else to give, then, we need to pay a little bit more attention to what, how God is dealing with us. The coffer is empty. There's nothing else He can do for us. He has given us everything. He's laid it out before us, and it's up to us to reach and take or partake of it and secure it for ourselves. And so He's given everything, and now we come to the net. The net, and he ends this in verse 52 with a question that's so important. And that's probably not the right definition or the explanation. But let's begin here in verse 47. But he says again. And when he says again, well, he's continuing a thought. Like, for example, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchantman. Then again, he said, again, the kingdom of heaven is like unto a net. This net, and this was very familiar to these folks. It's like they were fishermen. This net was cast into the sea and gathered of every kind. If you've ever done any kind of fishing with a net, I used to do a lot of fishing with a cast net, catch bait fish. Well, I catch fish, and some things that would make me throw the net down and run. Snakes and eels. You ever caught an eel? They're nasty. But anyway, they catch everything this net does. And so they bring the net to the shore, he says, and he catches every kind of fish or whatever's in the sea, which when it was full, they drew it to shore, they set it down, and they gathered the good into vessels, but they cast the bad away. That's just an obvious statement. It really needs no explanation. It really doesn't need an explanation when you consider spiritual things. The gospel, the kingdom of heaven is like unto a net, and this is what we have. He's given us a net. We find in Matthew 28. Go ye into all the world, disciple all nations, cast the net. And you're going to catch good, and you're going to catch bad. And so you have to make a determination, and it's based largely upon man's actions and speech and things of that nature. But you have to make a judgment. You take the good, you hold on to it, you nurture it, you feed it, you cherish it, and you cast the bad away. And it's not an eternal judgment, but he's describing the end time judgment, where Jesus is going to judge all men. All men. He's going to set judgment of all men. 2 Corinthians 5 verse 10 tells us. And he's going to take everything that's good and he's going to gather it into his barn. But listen to it now. He says, so shall it be at the end of the world, the angels shall come forth and sever the wicked from among the just, and shall cast them into the furnace of fire. There should be wailing and gnashing of teeth. Okay. This is going to be a bad time. This is going to be a time of anguish. This is going to be a time of jubilation for those that are right with God. It's going to be a time of joy, but it's really going to be a time of anguish, of pain, and sorrow, and eternal crying, eternal, eternal torment, if you will. And he said it's going to be wailing and gnashing of teeth. It's no end. For me, it's said to me, and it's ringing in my head. This continual wailing and crying and lashing out or gnashing with their teeth. They're just tearing into one another like a wild animal. Just a horrible scene. And we can describe hell in various forms, but that's enough for me. That's enough right here. You don't have to go any further describing hell. Furnace of fire, wailing, gnashing of teeth, eternal blackness, and eternal away from God forever. That's enough. That's enough. You don't have to go any further. I don't want to go there. Go ahead, Lennon.
You talked about the net a while ago, and when I've been shrimping before, and you got a culling board. What's the ratio of what you keep and what you throw back?
You know, I don't know.
It's not a lot. It's not a lot. And matter of fact, you go to Matthew 7:13, and he's giving you that ratio. It's a few.
It's a few, that's right. But you know what? I'm glad you said that because, now, I don't know, maybe some of the ladies here have been shrimping before. I don't know. Maybe you have, maybe you haven't. But I can tell you, I went shrimping one time. And as Leonard said, we threw out the nets, and they got boards that cause the net to drag the bottom and suck up everything. And when it's time to pull that net in, I don't know how you describe work in any other fashion but work. This work, pulling that net in. You know, when you don't have a winch you're not on a big shrimp boat, you're in a little Mickey Mouse boat out here, and that's what you feel like, Mickey Mouse. When you're pulling, you're pulling the net and you're using muscles you didn't even know you had. And then when you get the net in, you find logs and mud and crabs, and they're trying to pinch you, and you find all kind of weeds, and oh, there's a shrimp. Really? A shrimp? Then you dig through the mud, and oh, there's another one. Hey, we got 2 shrimp. Put it in this 500-gallon bucket over here. My point is, it's work to get the bounty that the sea would give you. And so it is work in the kingdom. You may have a few that you get, but those few are well worth the effort. And it is work. It's lots and lots of work, but it's worth the effort. My father-in-law said many years ago that as we teach the gospel, Brother John's going to preach us a lesson this morning, and Brother Leonard's going to be doing tonight. We're still doing tonight. Right?
Yeah.
There might have been a hole in the net, but
That shrimp got away. Yeah.
no. But what we're going to do, my father-in-law said, if we have the ability to save or have a small part in one soul saving themselves, then all the work we put into this is minor. It's all worth it. It's all worth it, because at the end of the day, it's a few that's going to be saved. And so that's enough about that, I reckon. But that's what he described as this wailing and gnashing of teeth. But it brings us to this next verse here, that verse 51. And Jesus says it's kind of profound to me. Have you understood all these things? Wow. Have you understood all these things? What do you think? Have you understood? I'm not saying asking you that, but ask yourself a question. Have I understood what Jesus wanted me to see? Have I understood all these things and put them all together so that when I'm reading and trying to follow and learn from him, I comprehend what he's saying here? Because the next thing he says is very important to our understanding these things. Have you understood all these things? And their answer was, yes. They say unto him, yea, Lord. What? You do? You understand all these things? Yes, Lord, we understand. We have a grip on these things. We comprehend what you're saying. We understand. And then he said unto them, therefore, now that word therefore, in light of the fact that you have just affirmed your understanding of all these things concerning the sword, the kingdom, the net, the parable of the mustard seed, the tares, the leaven, and all these things, therefore, every scribe, now scribe was someone who was to write down the law and to transcribe it, to write it down, make sure it was preserved for ages to come. That was their job. They're basically a lawyer. Then he says, every scribe which is instructed. Now let's stop there just for a moment. And I want to direct our attention to 2 Timothy 3:16, 17. where as we are instructed, we're instructed by the Word of God. And Paul says to Timothy, that the Word of God is all inspired. Okay? In other words, it's divine. It comes from God Himself. It's not just a word that man had written down. This is God's Word. It's what He has said, what He has conveyed to us. And the Word is profitable for reproof, for doctrine, for rebuke. And this is the point. Instruction in righteousness. Now, let's go back here. Jesus is saying to these folks here, therefore, every scribe which is instructed unto the kingdom of heaven is like a man that is a householder, someone who's taking care of a house, the head of the house, seeing to the affairs of the house, which this householder, as he is seeing to the affairs of the house, he brings forth out of his treasure. He recognizes that his household that he's over, that he's the head of, has treasures, and he brings forth from the treasure things new and old. Now, do you understand these things? Ask yourself the question, do you understand what Jesus is saying here? Understanding now, I want you to really understand that we made the point through our teaching in chapter 13 that Jesus uses physical things to explain spiritual things. Okay? So he's taking this physical householder who is over his house, and he has treasures that are old and new. And if he's instructed properly, then he brings forth from his treasure things new and things old. So, I'm listening. Paul?
Well, he's referring to the things new and old. He's referring to the truths that are found in the Old Testament concerning the kingdom, as well as the new that is being revealed now.
There you have it. There you have it. This householder has treasures old and new pertaining to the Old Testament and the New Testament. Okay? In the Old Testament, there are treasures untold, that if you search for these treasures, if you read and understand these treasures, you'll take and share those treasures, because those very treasures are the ones that point themselves or point you in the direction of the treasures new in the New Testament. The New Testament, the new treasures revealed by the old treasures produced. You're not afraid of the Old Testament. You don't shun it. You don't put it aside. You embrace it, and then you embrace the New Testament, and you bring forth treasures from here and from here. Someone please, how about this? Can you think of an Old Testament treasure? The book of Psalms is full of them. But an Old Testament treasure that you would bring forth to help someone guide them to Christ?
Much of Jeremiah. I mean, you go to the book of Jeremiah and find all kinds of things in there.
Jeremiah was one I was thinking of.
Great mind.
Let me share one with you, real briefly. I don't know that I can do that briefly. Jeremiah 10:23. What does it say? It's not in man that walketh to direct his own footsteps. That's what it says. Is that right? Okay. I was reading the other day, and I have no way to validate what I read, because I don't have the tools in front of me to check these things out. But just taking them on the surface, what they mean. In the course of a person's lifetime, they will take, I was telling the wife this morning, they will take 7,500 steps a day. 7,500 steps a day. Okay, you do the math, and if you live to be 80 years old, you will have taken 219 million steps in your lifetime. Now you'd think, in light of Jeremiah 10:23, it's not a man that walks to direct his own steps. Out of 219 million, you would think that man would pick one step that's right. He would take a step in a direction that's right. 219 million chances, steps, to bring you to the point of, do you understand? And I thought about it and I said, okay, Larry, let's look at you. I was 33 years old when I obeyed the gospel. It took my wife 15 years to convince me that I needed to do what's right. Okay? So I just used 15 as a number. So in those 15 years, I've done the math and I wasted 18.75% of my life. 18% of my life is gone. I can't get back. And so for the last 43 years, I've been a Christian. I have been a Christian for 53% of my life. And you can see where I'm trying to go with this. The treasure of the Old Testament tells us that man has not the ability to direct his own footsteps. Stop. If I don't have that ability, someone show me where I can get that ability. Someone guide me. Someone help me. Someone direct me. And therein is the Word of God. That's the beauty of the Old Testament. If I don't have the ability to find my own way, Lord, lead me on. Here am I. I'm yours. I'm ready to commit myself. Show me the way. And let me take the proper steps. That when my steps are ended in this life, my steps end at your throne in anticipation of hearing, enter thou into my rest, thou good and faithful servant.
Sounds like Philip and the Ethiopian eunuch.
Exactly. The Ethiopian eunuch. And so many people today are taking steps that we find in the New Testament. We can make a treasure of the New Testament that Jesus said in Matthew 11:28, come unto me, all ye that labor and heavy laden, I'll give you rest. There's a beauty right there. He said, take your steps, direct your steps toward me. Come to me. You will find rest. I will give it to you. It will be yours. And so that's what I see that as what Jesus is saying. I'm a householder. I recognize the treasures of the old and I recognize the treasures of the new, and I bring forth from my treasures that's been given to me, old and new, to give or share share the gospel with the world. And so that's my take on this. So I'll be interested to hear what you think, Don. He didn't have his hand up. Don, not John. But do you see what I'm trying to drive at here? Oh, you have your hand up?
That was a ditch.
Oh, okay. Okay. Go ahead, Casey.
Well, if you go back up to verse 35, when he was kind of explaining why he was using these parables, it was to fulfill what was spoken by the prophets. I will open my mouth in parables. I will utter what has been hidden since the foundation of the world. And, and then he said, I speak to you in parables, earlier in the chapter, because you've been given the secrets, but to the other people it has not. But what secrets have they been given? The secrets of what the kingdom of heaven is. He doesn't start any of these parables without saying the kingdom of heaven is like. So what is this mystery? It's all what the kingdom of heaven is.
That's all, yeah.
All of it.
Yeah.
He's basically explaining what the kingdom of heaven is. And going back to what, the mysteries from the Old Testament, bringing forth and culminating it right here.
And that's a good way to do it. And if you look in the New Testament, that's exactly what they did. They go back. They go back and go to the Old Testament to bring forth evidence of Christ. They go back. You see, and that's what we're talking about here. And so it's just I don't know, it's just a beautiful thing of how God I'll get you, designed His Word to work with or work for man in the instruction, to make us understand. And we can't understand unless we get our nose in the book. You can't understand something that you don't know. It just doesn't exist. And so it's incumbent, I like that word. It's necessary for us, if we're to secure heaven for ourselves, that we find out what God has to say. Go ahead, John.
I was going to say, and once that discovery is made, the idea here is that you have responsibility to teach. So you see what most others don't see, and you have the responsibility to teach.
Don?
Remember who we're talking about here. We're talking about the scribe, lawyer, studier of the law, who has been instructed by God. And then he compares this lawyer who is instructed of God to a householder that brings forth, I guess, to show his visitors or impress his visitors, both things old and new. Well, he's talking about this lawyer, this scribe, who is instructed of God. So yes, he's going to bring forth Old Testament things and New Testament things. And so therefore you can't cast away the Old Testament.
No.
The Old Testament is the foreshadowing of what was actually being pictured in the New Testament.
Yeah. And we're going to hopefully, let me see something. Hopefully we'll get to chapter 14, but the more I talk, the less likely it looks. It looks like we're going to get there. But anyway, I was studying on chapter 14 and about John the Baptist, and in light of what Don said, we bring forth from the Old Testament and the New Testament. We can't throw away the Old Testament or disregard it. It's the backbone. It's the shadow of things to come that God had declared from the beginning, the end. Yeah, at the beginning, He declared the end. And so I was studying on this, and John the Baptist, for example, he wasn't killed or beheaded for his profession of faith. Now let that sink in just for a moment. Okay? It wasn't the fact that he proclaimed to be a follower of Christ, or a believer in the Messiah to come, or any of that, in the nature of that kind of thing, okay? It wasn't a profession of his faith. And so, we have a lot of people today that make the profession of faith. Oh, I'm a Christian. We can leave here today and go outside and go to Wally World up here, run across a complete stranger and say, "Are you a Christian?" And 99.9% of them will say what? "Oh, you better believe it. You better believe it, I'm a Christian." Yes, sir. I go to the Not in Darkness church over here. Not in Darkness. That's a title of a church, of a congregation. Anyway, they will proclaim faith. But John wasn't killed for his proclamation of his faith. What was he killed for? Bobby?
He told the king that he had his brother's wife.
Yeah, he was killed for the performance of his duty.
Morality.
He was killed because he could not help but say the truth. The truth is what got him killed. He had an obligation, as John pointed out. The householder. You got an obligation. You got a responsibility. These are your treasures. This is what you're showing. The things old, the things new, but they're your treasures, and you have a responsibility associated with those treasures. And so you have a performance of duty towards God. because of those treasures. And the Apostle Paul said, I believe, and I can't quote it right now, but he said, by the grace of God, I am who I am. I am who I am. And so this net, this net catches good, catches bad, catches rough around the edges, catches some that's smoother than glass, catches good, catches bad. But those good are gathered over here to be honed and polished even more, and the bad are cast off. Go ahead, Susan.
I think about my great-grandmother, who taught my grandmother the truth, who taught my dad, taught me, teaching our children. And now, one of our son, could care less about the truth, and it's heartbreaking.
It is. It's heartbreaking, and it's
Because it's
just,
beautiful, I mean,
yeah. It's just an incredible book. Words, instructions, guidance, however you might want to describe it, that's been put together by God Almighty for us. That's the beauty of this. It is for us. Go ahead, Don.
Carrying that thought a little bit further, in the net, there were evil and justified. The evil were cast away into a fire. The justified were not. They were used. What's the difference? What turns evil into justified? Well, God's the only one who can do that. You can't go from, if you're not justified by God, you are evil.
Yeah.
Period.
What's
That's
it
the
take
end of
to
the
be-
matter.
What does it take to be justified by God?
You have to be justified by God.
What does it take to get there? It's called obedience. It's called obedience. When Abraham was called, he was a friend of God, not because Abraham was a good guy. Well, I'm sure he was, but he was a friend of God because he obeyed. He stood justified before God because he obeyed. And we're taught a beauty of the Old Testament. As Samuel told Saul, when Saul was told to kill the Amalekites, and he, utterly destroyed them, but he brought back the king, King Agag, was that his name?
Yeah.
And the prophet Samuel come to him, and Saul tried to, explain away his error, thinking that he had done the will of God. He said, no, well, Samuel took the king and took him over here and killed him. And he says, that you may know, it's better to obey than to sacrifice. It's better to obey. That's the top shelf. That's the top of the line. When God says something, it's better for you, better for me to obey than to seek some half-hearted sacrifice that we assume that God's going to be okay with. So to stand in light of God's righteousness, you have to reach that level of determination to obey and commit that obedience for all your life. John.
I just had an interesting thought I never thought about in this, but this dragnet gathers it all, and they're separated. And it just made me think about the Romans 1 passage about there not being any excuse because the gospel has gone out. So, I mean, everybody has had a shot at it. But as Leonard was saying a while ago, not many of them will take hold in the mind. But there's another thing that comes out there is the fact that this net doesn't exclude anybody. It has gone out into all the world.
Yep.
So, you're not going to be able to stand there on this day of judgment that we're looking at here and say, well, nobody ever told me that.
Now, that's not going to be the case, is it? That's not gonna be the case. That's some kind of error that man has come up with, and we even sing a song with it sometimes here that I don't think it's scriptural. When in the better land before the bar we stand, how deeply grieved our souls may be. My soul's not gonna be grieved. When I'm in the better land, I'm gonna be happy. I'm gonna be joyful. And there's not gonna be anything that offends or has been disobedient to God there that will look at me and say, you never mentioned him to me. That's not gonna happen. That's not gonna take place. I understand the import of the song. I understand the import of the song. But it leaves a wrong impression about heaven, hell, judgment, and things of this nature. There's not going to be any unjust or sinner in the better land. They're not going to be there. Okay? So, but, anyway, lost my train of thought here. That's not hard for me to do. But verse 53, let's go on. And it came to pass that when Jesus had finished these parables, he departed there. And when he was coming to his own country, that was Capernaum, he taught them in their synagogue, insomuch that they were astonished and said, where has this man this wisdom and these mighty works? Wow. They were just taken back by his teaching. Where did he get this kind of wisdom? Where did he get this? And these mighty works that he's doing. And they equated all of these things, or tried to equate. He said, is this not the carpenter's son? We know that it is. It's not just the carpenter's son. Is not his mother called Mary? And his brethren, James and Joseph and Simon and Judas and his sisters, are they not all with us? When or where then hath this man all these things? Is he not flesh? Is he not mere mortal man? You see, they're answering their own question, because the answer to these things is no, he's not mere mortal man. He's the Son of God. This is where his wisdom comes from. This is where his mighty works come from. Yes, he was man, but he was more than man. He was God man. He was man. He was God in the flesh. But they're trying to I guess, minimize that and say, well, is this not? Wasn't he a carpenter's son? That's his mom, Mary, and there's his brothers and his sisters over there. He's a guy. He's like us. Where does all these mighty works come from? You see, and it goes back to what Jesus said. Do you understand? Obviously they didn't. You know, the multitude didn't. At his teaching, they didn't understand. But, you know, they make these statements. And Jesus himself said now, and they were offended. They were offended in him, it says in him, or by him, by his teaching. They took offense. They took exception to his teachings. But Jesus said to them, a prophet is not without honor, save in his own country and in his own house. And so a prophet, Jesus rightly recognized, even amongst his own people, even amongst his own town, his own community, his own area, amongst his own people, there's no honor. They don't give him the honor that he's so rightly deserved. But he has, what he's saying here is, he does have honor, but it's not in his own country. Not amongst the people he grew up with, not amongst the people that he knows in his community. It's outside. The people recognize who he is and what he is and what he's done, but it's not those that's closest to him. Go ahead, Leonard.
Well, in plain English, they're saying this is a nobody from nowhere, and how dare him correct us. But he is the writer of the law that supposedly they're supposed to be upholding, and he's showing them all the holes in it, and they don't like it.
Yep.
And that's going to continue on until they finally crucify him.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay. And in verse 58 says, and he did not many mighty works there because of their unbelief. In other words, he didn't waste his time. he moved on, he done his teaching, he seen how they responded, and so he suspended his mighty works there, and he moved on. Okay? And so we did get to chapter 14, right on time. Right on time, 1 minute. And so we'll start chapter 14 there next week, Lord willing. I appreciate all the comments, and Lord willing, we'll continue on.
So he didn't cast pearl before swine.
Exactly.